the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
When crypto prices are booming, you can be sure the scammers are not far behind. This time, it appears to be no different. Sometimes it's the old, reliable romance scam, a social media favorite where lonely people in search of companionship are groomed to part with their money, preferably in the form of crypto. Now that Bitcoin has broken all-time highs, the crypto criminals are back with a vengeance. Even some relatively sophisticated crypto investors accustomed to navigating their way around self-custody wallets like MetaMask have been burnt, as we will find out in a minute. This could be disheartening for people who are new to crypto and would like to take the plunge until they read about the latest scams and their growing level of sophistication. Carel de Jager is Research Group Leader for Distributed Ledger Technologies at the CSIR, and he joins us to discuss some of the trends he's observed in the ever-creative field of crypto scamming. He's also one of the developers of a blockchain forensic tool called ExoChain, which is now used by banks, regulators, and law enforcement officials in South Africa and, I believe, around the world. So welcome, Carel. It's good to talk to you again. I think it's been about 6 months.
Nice to be back. Thanks, Kieran.
When we last spoke in 2023, you made the point that scams are less prevalent when prices are low and tend to increase when prices are high. That makes sense. Is this still the case now that prices are at or around all-time highs?
Yes. If we look at the Fear and Greed Index as well as the Google search activity, then we can see that we are approaching extreme greed together with the price, which means that, there's a lot of new investors and new people, retailers especially, joining this frenzy. This new demand from inexperienced investors makes scammers very happy because that's low-hanging fruit and easy targets for them.
Okay, so give us some of the scams that you're investigating. I did mention that you've got this tool, which is called ExoChain, which I think competes or is similar to Chainalysis, right? It seems that the nature of crypto crime is evolving and getting more sophisticated.
Yeah, so crypto crime as a fraction of the total volume of all crypto transactions are actually dropping, and perhaps we can touch on that a little bit later. But crypto as a medium to lure people into scams are still extremely popular and evolving. There's been quite a lot of these reports from victims that are ending up in my inbox, partly because of the discussions that we've had previously. And, it's very similar to, for instance, these romance scams, like you've mentioned. There's a big one called the pig butchering scam, which was now unraveled globally.
That's pig butchering, right?
Yeah.
So what is that?
It's called pig butchering, but it's basically, it's analog to, raising a pig and then butchering it at the end of its life, when it's mature or when it's big or large, and I think that's kind of what these romance scams are, is people get lured into whatever, story the scammer has to tell, and then they actually become friends. They actually become friendly with each other, and then the victim really believes that this person has their best interest at heart. And then, this typically takes very long, and it's very large amounts that's involved in these type of scams. But in the end, they are lured into making a substantial investment or transferring their money to this newly found friend of theirs that they've gained the trust of over the years or over the months. And then, ultimately they lose their money. That's when the pig's actually butchered.
Where does crypto fit into this? Are they looking for money to be transferred in crypto rather than fiat currency?
That's typically the medium that the scammer or the criminal will use because, in their mind at least, crypto is not traceable. And it's much easier and the accounts won't be frozen. But we can talk about why that's not the case later. But yeah, there's quite a popular one, this romance or this pig butchering scams. There's also the typical Ponzi schemes. These are not easy to spot for the untrained eye, because in many cases there are real businesses built on top of these schemes. And in some cases, these businesses actually produce real products and services. What makes it a Ponzi scheme is that the revenue from these products and services are typically not enough to cover the business expenses, plus the very healthy profit that is promised to new investors. So that shortfall is then made up by the deposits of new investors. And it can take very long for these schemes to collapse, and they typically become extremely big, for example. There's another one, which is airdrop scams. And these are like...
Just before we get onto the airdrop
Yes.
scam, I mean, the Ponzi scheme one is an interesting one. Now, that typically is where somebody would be offering a very high rate of return above the market average or guaranteeing a return. Mirror Trading International being a good example, where they were offering 10% per month.
Yes.
Supposedly because they had this forex trading robot, which the Financial Sector Conduct Authority found did not exist.
Yeah.
So what was happening is that the older investors were being paid out of the new investors. Typical Ponzi scheme like that, right?
Exactly like that. Although I would even argue, that there's even some more sophisticated ones out there than for instance MTI, because MTI, I mean, it was quite obvious that product cannot produce those amount of returns, But some of the scammers are getting very, very sophisticated, and they would actually, create these products and services that put some doubt in your mind, even as an expert, as to whether those type of returns can legitimately be generated. So therefore, these can go on for many, many years. And
what kind of returns are we talking about here?
Well, that's a golden question, right? So anything that's too good to be true, that's obviously the golden rule, yeah. But some of them are like borderline. You'd see like maybe like 1% a day or 1% a week, and you think, that's not ridiculous. And then others are completely ridiculous, like thousands of percent a day. But even those, I've even had victims come to me that's even fallen for like a few 1,000% per day. And then, don't underestimate, the greed of people out there and potential and new investors.
And where are they hunting for these new victims? Is it on Facebook and social media?
It's so difficult for a new investor to get into this space. If you, for example, Google how to buy Bitcoin or something like that, you will get several results on the very first page, even that are illicit. So it's not a true exchange. It is in actual fact an illicit exchange and an illicit means to get access to these Bitcoin, and you will ultimately lose your money. And then once you've done that, you've made that Google search, the big techs and the social medias like Facebook and Twitter, they will pick up that you've made these searches, and then you'll be flooded with ads of more and more illicit schemes. And especially to new investors, to unsophisticated, non-technical people, this is very, very overwhelming, because to them, Bitcoin is just a means to make money. It's just a speculating instrument. It's nothing more than that. And if they do see these ads pop up that provides them with outrageous returns, it's extremely lucrative for them to click on to those.
Right. So, I mean, obviously the advice for people now we have crypto asset service provider licenses being issued in South Africa. So one of the first things you can do is check whether the ad that you're clicking on is a registered financial services provider.
That is true to a certain extent, although if I observe the trends, that is not something that a new investor would typically do.
Yeah, I agree.
They would simply, go through the process. And remember, they are lured into clicking on these sites. And then there's typically a well-crafted user journey that takes place, some flashy lights on the website, maybe a very well-designed graphics, maybe perhaps. And, I've even had extremely sophisticated people, very, very technical people with many years of experience in cryptocurrency that's fallen for these types of scams, especially once clicking on an ad somewhere on a website and then being lured into an airdrop scam, for example, or a fake token that they think they're buying the real one, but they're actually buying a fake one. Even some of them using sophisticated tools like MetaMask, for example, and then having their wallet drained. So I think that the registration of CASPs and them, being licensed is a good thing overall. But I'm not sure that would necessarily go a very long way in stopping these scams.
Yeah, I think it's a very big educational point, is that anybody thinking of buying crypto must be trained to find out if it's a registered exchange that they're buying from. You mentioned a few words there. So airdrop, let's explain. That's another type of scam which you're noticing. What is an airdrop?
Let me put it this way. So an airdrop is a typical scam, or it's not even only a scam because it's a legitimate cryptocurrency term, to be honest, but it's very abused, in typical scams. So an airdrop is just a way in which you can get free tokens if you do something, if you take some action, or in some cases you don't even have to take an action, to be honest. But these are typically claimable only through self-hosted wallets. And a self-hosted wallet is a wallet that's non-custodial, so it means it's not with an exchange or anything like that. It is a wallet of which you fully control. So it does take a little bit of sophistication from the user of that wallet, and you would expect that a user with a self-hosted wallet already has some experience in dealing with cryptocurrency.
Okay, I want to come back to this issue of self-hosted wallets, self-custody. This is where you're basically becoming your own bank. You're storing your crypto on a wallet that you yourself control. I think this is a point of confusion for a lot of people. So if you're using Luno or Valo or Altcoin Trader and you buy Bitcoin there, they store it for you. They have custody of your crypto. So you're placing a lot of trust in the exchange. Because what a lot of people are doing is saying, I'd rather have that in my own wallet, and there are various ways to do that. Let's come back to that in a minute. But I want to just pursue this thing about ExoChain, which is your software. This is this forensic tool for tracking down funds that appear to have gone missing on the blockchain. Are you getting interest from regulators? What kind of clients are you finding interested in this?
ExoChain, first of all, it contributes to the global intelligence of on-chain data.
All right, so there's another term there, on-chain data. This is, we're talking about blockchain.
Yes.
The blockchain being a database where every transaction is recorded, cannot be changed, so you can actually track every transaction that happens.
Every single transaction is open for anyone to track and look at its contents and its value and its time that it's happened and so on. This data, there's a huge amount of data. We're talking about collectively over all the blockchains, a few hundred transactions every second that happens. So ExoChain, collects all of this data. It then processes it in order to reach a certain goal, and then produces reports to, for instance, the end user or whoever uses this product. As you mentioned, it's very similar to the global giants like Chainalysis and Elliptic and those type of guys. But ExoChain is developed in South Africa by the CSIR, and it is optimized for the local South African market, and it contains intelligence, for instance, that might not be on the radar of these big guys. And there's a few features that's being developed in stealth mode, which means I cannot talk about it at this point, but that we believe that makes it very unique for the South African markets. And we obviously aim the regulatory industry as well as the crypto industry in South Africa to help them with compliance.
Right. When we last spoke to you, you assisted in an investigation that we asked you to do where a Moneyweb reader had some Bitcoin stolen. And you were able to track it down, and you eventually located in two wallets. I think one was with Binance. That's not to say Binance had anything to do with it. No, it just happened to be a wallet that was controlled by under the custody of Binance. And there was another exchange as well. But these scammers, of course, are using wallets with whatever exchange they can find, right? I mean, that was an interesting case. And I don't know if anything further happened on that particular one, whether there was police complaints laid. Do you remember?
That one, I don't think I followed all the way through the whole litigation process. There was actually a couple of others that we've assisted with that did successfully, result in the freezing of accounts as well as partial recovery of these assets. So yeah, that is possible. It is possible. It shows that it is possible if you have the right type of intelligence and the right type of reports, as well as cooperation with law enforcement. I think that's a very, very important part of this. Is you can only go so far with the data. But the custodians, like for instance the exchanges and so on, they also need a directive from law enforcement, like for instance the South African Police, the Financial Intelligence Center, the Asset Forfeiture Unit, the High Court, for example. All of these players actually need to come together, and I think that's part of the role that the CSIR plays, is to bring these guys together and produce a streamlined product and a streamlined process for victims of cryptocurrency crime to potentially, hopefully, recover their lost assets in South Africa.
I mean, that's encouraging for people to know that they can actually do that, because they're often scammed and this money just appears to disappear into the ether. There was recently, CNBC did quite a good documentary about the American guy who hacked Mt. Gox. This was back in 2014. And he made off with 50,000 Bitcoin, roughly. And he sat there on this Bitcoin for all these years. His big mistake was he had a robbery at his house. $400,000 cash was stolen, and he asked the cops to come and investigate. And they said, well, here's a guy who's like 33 years old. What's he doing with 400,000 cash in his home? And they started to investigate more, and when they found he was into crypto, and they became suspicious, and eventually they got access to his computer, and they found out that he was the hacker. They recovered all of that Bitcoin that he'd been sitting on, which is now worth about $3.3 billion. And he only ended up spending about a little bit more than a year in jail. Can you believe it? But it was fascinating, and it was very good detective work. It involved some sort of feet on the ground, as well as the kind of detective work that you're doing on the blockchain. Is this the type of thing that you're getting asked to do by law enforcement?
Yes, exactly that. So, we have the ability to monitor, for instance, a transaction, to flag it and to monitor it on the blockchain. And if that money, for instance, moves, then we can automatically set up alerts to the necessary authorities to take action. And I think criminals around the world are actually becoming very much aware of this reality. And therefore, the amount of crime that happens with cryptocurrency is reducing dramatically. Chain Analysis is reporting currently we're on 0.3% of all cryptocurrency volume actually being illicit activity, and it drops every single year because law enforcement is getting more equipped, and the criminals is much more aware that it is faster, easier to actually catch them than using any other means of exchange.
All right. You talked about some advancements or progress that you're making on the ExoChain software. What are we talking about there? What advancements or developments have you made since we last spoke?
Well, it is still a fairly basic product. We are executing a fairly long roadmap, but it is detecting certain types of crimes, like for instance sanction evasion, exchange control evasion, and a number of other things. And we do this through monitoring a very large collection of source data. This includes native blockchain data like transactions, for example, and patterns of these transactions, sanction lists, exchange activity, cross-border flows, and so on. And we also have a growing list of address identifications and some algorithms which connect different types of addresses on the blockchain to each other. This is called clustering. And, through processing all of this data correctly, we then produce customized reports and tailored reports for our end users. And then, as I mentioned, there's a number of features that we believe are truly unique that we are also working on in the background.
Okay. We look forward to hearing about that, particularly the stealth mode developments that you were talking about. Let's go back to this thing on self-custody. You also mentioned that experienced investors are getting scammed. They're falling into some traps, which you would expect them not to, but it does seem to be happening. And there's a big move towards self-custody. This is where if you have your Bitcoin on Luno or Vala, you would take your coins off that exchange and you would put it in a wallet like Ledger or MetaMask. You have hardware wallets and software wallets. So maybe just talk about this, because that's a complicated area in itself. And this is one of the reasons why adoption of crypto is not really going to the mass market as yet. It's just too complicated.
Yeah, owning your assets is really the pinnacle of becoming a sovereign individual, which is what crypto is all about, to be honest. But as we know, owning your digital assets has never been possible before the creation of Bitcoin. It was easy to own your cows. It was easy to own maybe your money or your gold. But that's really been the remarkable thing of crypto assets. It's this ability to own the asset truly. But this comes with great risks, and there's a spectrum of custody options available. It's all the way from maybe putting all of your assets on the exchanges that come with the risk, and maybe on the other side of the spectrum, it's implementing these complex hardware wallet multi-sign schemes, vault schemes. And on either ends of the spectrum is actually not recommended. So you need to find a balance in the spectrum. And that balance, in order to strike that balance, you need to answer a few questions. Maybe, how technical are you? How technical are your heirs or your dependents? Because if you die and you left your assets in a very complex storage scheme, then those assets might be lost. There's a very good book, by the way, from Pamela Morgan to read on this, Crypto Assets Inheritance.
What's it called? Crypto Asset Inheritance.
Crypto Asset Inheritance, yeah. There's another question that you ask is, how fast do you need access to your assets? How much money are you actually storing, and for how long are you going to store this money? So, and then once you ask these questions, then you'll get the exact right balance of where to store your assets, which portion of it maybe to keep on an exchange and which portion of that to keep on a hardware wallet or something similar. But for the vast majority of people, the right balance is actually, and this is a bit controversial, but it's actually to keep the majority of their assets on the exchange, because self-custody is extremely, extremely hard. And I've seen this now with some very sophisticated people that's got it wrong. That's gotten it wrong. The other day there was someone that I know that got their MetaMask wallet drained with substantial funds in that, and that was because there was a pop-up that asked them, they visited the website. This was a adversarial website, which means the website was hacked or something similar to that. And there was a pop-up from their MetaMask wallet asking them to sign a transaction. They didn't read. That was their big mistake. They didn't read, and they just accepted. But, anyone can actually make that mistake, regardless of how sophisticated you are. So the tools and the user experience of these non-custodial wallets is really, really bad. It's like very, very lacking. And until we fix that, I personally would recommend, even with the substantial risk that comes with that the majority of assets for new investors especially is kept on exchanges.
Interesting. I can't say that I disagree with you on that, given the complexity that we've just been talking about. And I have a MetaMask wallet as well. Not easy to use. You've got to be very careful what you're clicking.
Yeah.
Okay. I think with all of these scams, a lot of people new to crypto might be put off. First of all, you have all-time highs. People say, Bitcoin's it's close to 1.4 million rand today. There's that. The fact that it's very expensive. And the second thing is, have I missed the boat? And we talk. All I hear about is scams. So people don't disaggregate the risks that there are. So if you're buying on a Luna or a Vala, that's safe. Or many of the other exchanges, and they will be licensed now in the months going forward. But there are parts of that chain, the part of that ecosystem that are not safe. And we've just been talking about MetaMask and these pop-ups and bugs and hacks that can happen in that area. And then there's KYC, which does seem to be an impediment to broader adoption of crypto. What's your thoughts on all that?
So, in my view, this is quite a controversial topic in how to create the policy and the right environment. If you speak about, for instance, KYC, and if you consider the creation of crypto policy as a mathematical algorithm, and you can change a number of variables to optimize for a given outcome. Sorry for my technical language here, but but imagine you have a couple of goals. So number one is you want to reduce the amount of money laundering, terrorist financing, and theft that's going on in the world. And maybe another goal of you might be to accelerate financial inclusion and innovation thereof, And so let's imagine these are your goals, and you have a few dials, and imagine these as knobs that you can turn to one side or the other that will influence these goals that you have. But, and the goal of the regulator is to turn these knobs and to strike exactly the right balance, between all the goals that they want to achieve or their mandate. So these goals or these dials can be things like the amount of KYC that financial institutions must collect, or the amount of reporting that they need to do, or the amount of on-chain surveillance that they need to do, and so on and so forth, right? So the question that I typically pose is, what happens if you, for instance, move the KYC dial all the way to 0? So let's just go on this, thought journey. And imagine there's no KYC required for dealing with
KYC is, of course, know your customer.
Know your customer. It's all the ID and the
ID, proof of address,
residence, and all those things that you need to provide before opening accounts, right? So let's say there's no KYC, or let's say very little KYC, and you turn the chain surveillance knob all the way to the other side, then what will happen then to your goals? Will it stop illicit transactions like money laundering, terrorist financing, and theft? And what will happen to financial inclusion and innovation and so on, And I don't necessarily have the answer, but we just saw the EU, for example, banning the use of non-custodial wallets, like self-hosted wallets, a wallet in which you have, or the anonymous use at least thereof, you have to actually KYC your wallet.
That's astonishing. So if you have, for example, a Ledger hardware wallet, and you're storing your Bitcoin on that, you have to KYC if you're in the EU now.
Correct. So before you can put any funds on that wallet, before you can move it from an exchange or any platform, you first have to provide documentation that you are actually, the owner of that wallet and all of the necessary KYC that goes with that.
What does that mean we talk about, the sovereign individual. It's a term that you mentioned. A lot of people in the crypto space, this is a way that you can basically restore sovereignty over your own life and your own financial future, where meddling bureaucrats don't know exactly what's going on. What does it mean for the future of the sovereign individual?
Yeah, so that's the question we need to answer. And, this goes against the grain of crypto if you impose a radical policy like this, because it basically eradicates the entire idea of crypto, which is this ability to be, your own sovereign individual and to have sovereign ownership over your assets, and especially, the need not to be surveillanced, for example. So, that's why I'm tingling with this question is, what if we reduce KYC and what if we increase on-chain surveillance, and what will happen? And I don't have the answer to that. But, there are some signals in the public domain that we can use to create a hypothesis for this. First, the World Bank themselves state that financial inclusion and even severe poverty is mainly caused by the compliance burdens by banks. Secondly, there are fragmented self-reporting mechanisms for crypto crime victims out there on the internet to provide information such as the transaction ID or the addresses that you've interacted with. And these fragmented informal reporting mechanisms frequently make their way into established intelligence systems and investigations, like, for instance, the chain analysis and the elliptics of this world. And the success rate for identifying the defendants or the criminals in these cases and recovering the assets are absolutely huge, even through these informal systems, So I think that if this hypothesis is true, and we are actually able to monitor illicit activity with much greater accuracy and a much higher prosecution rate, while also catalyzing financial innovation through proper on-chain analysis as opposed to conventional or traditional compliance measures like, for instance, KYC and those burdens that are placed on CASPs. If this hypothesis is true, I think that should be considered. So just to go, there are things that we can actually measure. And we can build these mathematical models to turn these dials on our behalf and determine what their optimal levels are. I'm not saying no KYC is the answer. All I'm saying is that we should measure these things before enforcing radical policies, that might have adverse effects that we are not even aware of.
It is interesting that we're having some very draconian laws, and we have a very frightened regulators around the world, when in actual fact the problems that they're trying to solve, as you've just mentioned, could be solved by just better intelligence, doing what you're doing, observing transactions on the blockchain, linking the dots. Even that might be, sacrilege to the purists. But there are alternatives. And I think in South Africa's case, we're trying to get off the grey list that was imposed by the Financial Action Task Force by, I think it's February 2025. And, of course, we've got to be showing that we're doing everything possible to stop money laundering and anti-terrorism financing and so on.
Of course, and I have to, commend our regulators as well. It's not an easy space to navigate. There's huge pressures, like you've mentioned now, through the FATF, through the World Bank, through the BIS and other of the global entities. And, finding the right balance between the pressures from these and very, very explicit recommendations from these entities and financial innovation is really a very difficult task. And I think our regulators are actually doing a fantastic job in navigating that.
All right, Carel de Jager, Research Group Leader for Distributed Ledger Technologies at the CSIR. Thank you very much for that fantastic discussion.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.